All right. Well, I want to introduce everyone to John Stange. He is a bivocational minister, and I'm going to let him do most of his own introduction because I think his story is really interesting. He was on the Rob Skinner podcast, and Rob actually reached out to me and said, "Nate, have you heard this podcast? Have you connected with this guy? It's sounds like a lot of the same stuff that you guys are doing." So I'm actually really excited to have John here to just learn from you. You are sounds like you're a decade or two beyond where a lot of us are at. And so I appreciate your sacrifice for the kingdom of God and just excited to learn from you. So how did you get started in this? I know you talked about that a little bit on Rob's podcast, but if you could give us a brief rundown of how this all came about for you, I'd love to start there.
Sure, and I guess your question is, like, how did I become, I guess, kinda entrepreneurial in ministry, right? Is that kinda the idea?
Yeah, totally. How did you make that shift? We heard a little bit about that story, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, growing up, I actually grew up in a very entrepreneurial context. My, family, we had a small family grocery store, and, my father also owned, just, rental apartments. So he did real estate, and he did that, and so I was surrounded by an entrepreneurial philosophy that definitely had an influence on me. That was something that our family learned to value, and, when I entered into ministry, obviously, one of the more entrepreneurial versions of ministry that exist is church planting. And so I've been involved in church planting for a while. The church that I presently serve, my wife and I, we planted this church. It's a church replant situation. And we planted it in 2008. So we've been here about 16 years. And one of the things you discover when you get involved in church planting is that that is not a predictable and stable way, typically, to earn an income. You do that because that's something the Lord calls you to do. But in and of itself, it has a lot of unpredictability, and that just kind of goes with the territory. So, a lot of people, including the Apostle Paul, when you look at his life and his experience, when you get involved in church planting ministries, you also typically have something in mind that you're going to do that will help supplement your income so that you could serve in ministry. And the ministry side of things doesn't necessarily have to be the way that you primarily earn an income. Now, the context that I serve in, their desire was to pay me an income. We had some outside mission support and all that for a little bit, but that went away really quickly, and the church got into a spot where paying me was something they were unable to do at all at some points or consistently at other points. And so we went through a several year stretch where that was the case. And I remember really just praying about it and feeling very specifically that the Lord had called me to serve here and believing that he would supply means for me to support my family if this is what he was calling me to do. So I just began praying about it and really just reached out to the Lord for wisdom on that. And one at a time, he started showing me a variety of ways that I could be earning an income while serving the church at the same time. And the beautiful part of some of these sources of income, excuse me, is that many of them are digitally delivered and can be somewhat automated depending on just kind of how they go. And so I started off with writing books and releasing self-published books. Then I got into podcasting, and then I started developing a whole world of an online platform and realized that there were many different ways that we can ethically earn an income through digitally deliverable products or courses or things of that nature. And as a result, it has, just getting that figured out really liberated me to serve in ministry without that pressure over my head of trying to figure out what to do financially when I was trying to answer the calling that the Lord had placed on my life.
Wow, that's incredible. And so what route, like for us as tent makers and the crew that we work with, a lot of the beginning is, okay, what route are you going to go in? So what is it? I mean, I know you said you produce a couple of books and podcasts. What brings in your income these days?
So I keep a list of this on my phone. I have 19 different sources, might be 20 now. I have to look at the list here, but I have at least nine. Oh no, it's up to 22. Okay. So I have 22 different sources of income, and they're kind of all over the place. Some of them only bring in a little bit. Like I got an email about an hour before we jumped on here to record saying that for something that I participate in, I was receiving $30. And I thought, oh, great. It's wonderful because I didn't have to do any real work at this point now to earn that $30. It's just connected to some of the other things I'm doing. But that I'd put down as like a minor source of income. But some of the major ones now, the church does pay me a salary. They know that that's optional, so that can come or that can go. That's up to them. I also teach at a local university, so those would be two traditional sources of income. But then I receive royalties from a few different sources, so book royalties. And the nice thing about book royalties is that they're also taxed at a different rate than traditional income. So when you report the IRS has a different rate that they tax those, and so you actually get to keep more of that than you do traditional sources of income, just based on the tax structure for royalties. So I have royalties coming from a few different sources. I have affiliate commissions that I receive from a variety of sources. I have ad revenue that comes from YouTube. I also have podcast ad revenue. I have a job directory online that people are able to utilize, and that doesn't take much work at all at this point on my part. I run a membership community where I teach people how to build, grow, and monetize online platforms. And that's something that has several different sources of income related to it. I receive affiliate commissions from a software that I recommend. I do voiceover work. I have crowdfunding. I receive some speaking honorariums. I have another directory just for podcasters, and then coaching and courses. Those would be the main sources. So it's a growing list. And the cool thing is, some of the things on that list, like some of that YouTube ad revenue, once I set that up, I literally don't have to do anything for that after setting it up. And so it ends up being something that, it could be a nice, steady source of income that doesn't have to be something that demands a lot of my time.
Wow, that's incredible. So you're spinning a lot of different plates. Some of them sound like they are spinning themselves, so to speak. How much time are you spending in any given week, ministry, and then also producing the side income or the main income, I guess?
The majority of my time is spent between my church and the university.
Okay.
And even just on the personal standpoint, and my family. So the
Mhm.
church, the university, and my family, that truly is where the majority of my time is being spent. One of the things that I don't do hardly at all is watch TV. I don't really sit down and watch TV much. I mean, on occasion I'll try and catch a show, and I guess during football season I like to watch some football. But I think people would be amazed at how much time they have if they cut TV mostly out of your life. You don't have to cut it all the way out, but you've got more time than you think. I find that if I use the margins of the day, so whether it be first thing in the morning to create content or later in the evening when basically my household is shutting down, and that oftentimes ends up being when it is. So this would be like around 10:30 at night. I'm usually the last one to fall asleep. That's when a lot of my books have been written. That's when a lot of my voiceover work has been recorded, or a lot of my podcast content has been recorded. A lot of that happens after 10:30 p.m. In fact, last night, between 11:15 and p.m. and midnight, I edited three podcasts and I created two videos in those 45 minutes. And so
Wow.
I've got, five new pieces of content that went out today that were edited during that 45-minute span that I could have been sitting down watching TV, but instead I decided to create content that it doesn't go away. That's a beautiful thing about it. It doesn't go away, and it helps build momentum over time as you produce these things, they don't disappear. So you
Mhm.
put it out there and people can use it and benefit from it. And 5 years from now, it's still there and it's still helping people. And that results in you receiving sometimes compensation, or sometimes it just helps you build an audience, or however it is, right? So there's personal benefit you receive while you help other people with the content you create.
Wow, that's incredible. So you're probably spending 2 to 3 hours a week from the sounds of it on the extra stuff outside of the university.
So it would be more than that, but it would be less than 10 hours a week.
Okay, gotcha. And what do you teach at the university?
I teach digital media, so that's my main focus there. but I also teach Bible and theology classes, and I also teach. There's one class that they had me teach this semester that it's just a class for artists in particular, those that are art majors, teaching them how to basically earn an income from their art, how to turn their art into a business when they end up in the professional world outside of their university studies. So that was kind of a fun class to add to the mix. But most of the time, I teach Bible, I teach theology, and I teach digital media.
Wow. And do you have a background in digital media? Is that a part of what helped you create all these different platforms and edit 3 videos in 45 minutes?
It's funny, like, I do kinda have a background in it, but it's mainly a background that got developed by just throwing myself into it.
Okay.
So, years ago, I always had a dream of being a radio DJ growing up. I
You
that
have
was
a
one of the
voice for
things.
it. Goodness.
Thank you, I appreciate that, but I remember thinking about it as a kid, and I thought, I'd love to do that someday. It was on my list of, like, 20 things I wanted to do, but it was one of my main things, and, the early 2000s, I got hired to be a radio DJ. I got specifically hired to be the announcer and production director for a radio station, a Christian radio station up in northeastern Pennsylvania, and it was a station I had appeared on sometimes as a guest, and their announcer was I guess he was transitioning to a different role in a different place, and so that opened up. I auditioned for it. I got hired. They taught me how to edit digital media. They taught me how to manage the board as far as running the different shows and how to work with satellites and how to, like, I it was very much on the job training with that. I didn't come to them with a whole bunch of experience in media, but in taking that role, it taught me a lot about media. And that was well before podcasting was a common word or a thing. I mean, this is in the early 2000s. It wasn't another 15 years before I felt like podcasting started to become a regular thing. But after that time, I started doing a lot of voiceover work too, and then when podcasting kinda came onto the scene, I thought, "Maybe I try my hand at this." And I'll tell you, podcasting has turned into, I know that probably there are plenty of people that are listening to us right now that very much have ministry as a focus of their life, and, I have to say, I don't call podcasting a hobby anymore. I used to refer to it as a hobby of mine. I look at it now and I realize that on any given week, I have the opportunity to share the message of the gospel with more people through podcasting than I have through any other means that the Lord's ever entrusted to my stewardship.
Hmm.
And I get very excited about the possibilities with it. But the wonderful thing is, too, he's also allowed me to earn some income from doing that. And so that's a blessing to my family. And when it's a blessing to my family, it's likewise a blessing to our local church because it takes some pressure off the church as far as doing that, allows us to hire additional staff and do additional ministry. And so all these things, they all kind of work together. And it's just pretty cool to see how the Lord orchestrates it all.
Hmm, that's incredible. So, I think a lot of the people that we have listening, again, like I said, they're getting started. And so for some of us, man, the idea of building all this digital media and jumping into that realm, it's some people are geared that way, and some people, man, it's like don't touch it with a 10-foot pole. So if and it sounds like you built this over quite a good span of time to where you've gotten to where you are. If someone was dedicated to going the tent making route and they wanted to do kind of the digital design like you've done and build out different ministry type platforms, how long do you think it would take that person? I know that's going to be a variable amount, but time frame, where should they get started if they want to? What's the best media source to just, okay, start here and this is the best one to get going with?
So it takes everybody their own amount of time, right? It's different for everybody. But I will say if you're consistent, so that's one of the first things I always tell people. If you're willing to do this, make sure, or if you want to do this, make sure you choose to be consistent. You have to be committed to do something, I would say, consistently for 3 years, meaning that you're going to create one new piece of weekly content every week for 3 years, or maybe more than one per week, but at least one per week for 3 years. Now, you'll see momentum before 3 years, but the interesting thing is, once you hit that 3-year mark, if you've been consistent and you pick the right thing that actually serves a need for other people, you discover that at that 3-year mark, you get to experience some momentum that is outside your ability to just push it. It starts moving and growing on its own in some respects, where you see, the momentum that gets built over the course of a 3-year span of time really starts to pay off. So I tell people, expect a gradual process of 3 years, but there will be signs of encouragement well before the 3 years. It's just that 3-year mark tends to be when momentum builds. But as far as where to start, so I'll tell you the process that I go through and the process I went through, but I'll also say this can be adjusted for other people. I actually think it's helpful to start with one piece of written content. Um, so my route went like this. I started writing books that I would self-publish on Amazon through their Kindle Direct publishing, and
Mhm.
that worked out well. It seemed like I had a niche for writing things that people wanted to read, and in those early seasons, that became a nice source of revenue where I was earning at least $1,000 a month through my Kindle publishing, and sometimes it was twice that, and sometimes it just would kind of fluctuate, but early on, that tended to become a thing that started to show some promise. So I kept writing, but I didn't really have a website that was highly developed at that point. That was like 2014 is when I really dedicated myself toward Kindle publishing, self publishing. And then in 2015, toward the end of that, I really started getting into podcasts and I thought I should start creating these. And so I created separate podcasts. They weren't directly related to the books, but they were partially related, but they weren't connected super well. And then it took me until 2017 before I realized I really need to have a hub where people can come and get all my content, like a website that I could just direct people to, and they can go there and they can find the books, and they can find, at that point I was doing multiple podcasts, and I thought they could find all the podcasts, and I'll make it a blog so it's not a static website. I'll make it so there's like at least one piece of blog content each week that I put up there. And so I did that. And that's when things really started to make sense to me as far as creating a whole online platform. Because from there I realized, I need to do something that helps me connect with people beyond just visiting my website. I need to give people the opportunity to give an email address, for example, so that I can send them a newsletter or I can let them know about other things that I'm doing. And so I created a way that people could sign up to be on my email list. I gave away some freebies to encourage people to give that a shot. I started sending out a weekly newsletter. But then I looked at this and I thought, all right, this quickly can become overwhelming if
Mhm.
I don't figure out some sort of a system.
Yeah.
And if these are all separate pieces of content, I'm not going to have enough time to get all this done. So, what I recommend to people that they do, if they follow the system that I use, I call it a content waterfall, where basically I take one piece of written content and I turn that written content into multiple things. So, for example, I do this with my business platform and I do this with my faith based platform. So, I'll give the example that this will be good for other pastors that are listening or other church planters. What I do in that context is each week I prepare a sermon to share with my congregation. And when I prepare that sermon, I prepare it in such a way that I can easily turn it into a blog post after I preach it. So I preach it and then I turn it into a blog post and I take a portion of that blog post and I send it out to my newsletter with a link back to the blog or my newsletter list. And so it's all one thing. It's the sermon, it's the newsletter, it's the blog post, it's all of that together. It's all just one thing. And then I take the audio recording of that sermon and I release it as my Dwell on These Things podcast. I have a podcast called Dwell on These Things, and so the audio from that goes on that podcast. And then we have a YouTube channel where the video of that message being preached is also shared. And then I save that content to eventually use for future book chapters. And
Mhm.
so really it's just one piece of content being used 5 or 6 different ways. I could also chop up pieces of that and use it for social media posts if I wanted to as well. I don't do a ton with social media. I like the other things that I referenced a little bit better, but those are some of the ways that I utilize that content. You just take one piece of written content and you turn it into many different things. So for those in ministry, you could turn that one piece of written content, your sermon notes, into a blog post. It becomes a newsletter that becomes a podcast, that becomes video and social media. And it's all just one thing, just
Mhm.
being used different ways.
Wow, that's really powerful. I love that. And did you use, is there a platform that you use to do all that, or do you do it all kind of manually?
So I used to do it manually in the sense that I was hosting all my audio podcast via Podbean, and then I was hosting my websites via Squarespace. And I kind of, it was piecemeal. And I kind of had to do that because I needed to keep my budget very low. And so that's an affordable, those are affordable tools. They're not very expensive. But then over time, when I started earning more regular income from the things that I was producing, I invested in a software called Kajabi. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but a
Yeah.
lot of digital entrepreneurs use it because you can manage your entire online platform with it. And so it hosts your podcast, your email list, your website, everything, your courses, like anything. It's got payment portals built into it. It's an all-in-one solution that's not cheap, but it's also not ridiculously expensive, especially if you have some money coming in from what you're doing. So it wasn't where I started, but it's where I ended up. And now I have friends that create media, and they know how much I love using Kajabi. So I think Kajabi maybe should hire me at some point for something because I promote them quite a bit. I signed up for their affiliate program, so I do receive affiliate commissions from them. So in a way, they do pay me something. But I highly encourage people to look into that. They're really really useful.
Wow, that's great. Do you use any AI as along with this stuff for content creation or doing any of the platform pushing or whatnot?
So I don't yet because the content that I'm creating is sufficient for what I need. So I really haven't utilized it, but I noticed that almost every tool out there, so like Grammarly and yeah, and even Kajabi and others are starting to incorporate different AI solutions into their platform to help with editing. I guess I do use some AI in the sense that I use Grammarly to edit my blog posts and newsletters, and it always catches stuff. So that's really helpful. You know, it underlines it in red so I can change the words, or it notices that I use the wrong punctuation or whatever it may be. So that's a form of AI,
Yeah.
and I find it super helpful. But I know that there are other forms that are becoming really robust. So I'm not saying I'll never utilize a tool like that. It's just that the kind of content I create hasn't really demanded it yet. But if there's, I mean, I don't know, that stuff keeps getting smarter and smarter. Might, get me to a spot where I can record the podcasts and then AI can do all the editing for me and all that. I'd certainly be open to it if it's a time saver.
Yeah. We're I'm on a team planning a professionals conference for a few years out, and one of the things we want to build into it is taking all the sermons, instantly putting them into the platform and having every piece of content searchable right from the get-go. So if
That'd
you're
be
like,
awesome.
man, what did that one guy say? You could literally just search for it and boom, the transcript would come up, or you could start right from that spot and get going. So
That'd be
yeah,
great.
love the way you're thinking about that. Yeah, it's that's fun stuff.